What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Alright, so you've tuned in because you want to learn how to make a lemonade stand. Well, guess what? So does my daughter. And I figured, hey, what better way to take advantage of the situation than to create a DIY video for you guys and to make it a learning experience for her as well. So, two things here. One, she wants to make a lemonade stand because she wants to make some extra cash this summer. Great idea. But she also has aspirations of becoming an architectural engineer in her future. And I figure what better way to teach her how to do these things than to bring her in from design to build and completion on a project like this. And I always tell people, including my own kids, if you're ever going to design anything or if you want to be a designer, you better learn how to build it as well. Because if you don't have the concept of how things go together in the real world, you'll never be good at actually designing the project on paper or on a computer. Because understanding real-world connections is the most important part. So, without further ado, let's bring her in, let's get on the computer, and let's design this thing so we know what we're going to build. Okay, so here we are. Let me adjust my microphone really quick. All right, I got my daughter with me. Wave to the camera. This is a program called Chief Architect Premiere, and it's the X10 version, so yes, it's a little outdated, but at the same time, it's going to work perfectly for our lemonade stand project. So, Willow, we're going to get started here on building the walls or the actual framing of the lemonade stand, and this is going to help us do two things. One, it's going to help us conceptualize what it's going to look like before we actually build it, and two, this will also help us put our materials together, so we know what we're going to go buy and bring back to our house to start building. So first things first, like I said, we're going to build the frame of it, okay? So we're going to go in here, we're going to go up to the top. This is how you're going to learn how to use this program in particular. We're going to go to Build Wall, okay? And then I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to pick a straight half wall, okay? And I'm figuring our dimension is going to be about 2 feet by 4 feet, okay? For the area you can sit in, and that will allow you to have at least 2 people working the lemonade stand. So I'm going to draw a wall here, and then just at some random length, and I'm going to double click it. This is going to open. If you guys can see this, I'll bring it over here so you can see it. It's going to open our actual wall type, and it's going to show us our dimensions. And so on this program, this is going to default to, on a half wall, it's going to actually default to a filled-in railing, basically. So in order for us to make our height and our length, we can change the actual numbers in here, okay? So I'm going to go to where it says wall length. It says 44 inches. We said 4 feet, so I'm going to make it 48 inches, okay? And then see how it's clicked railing here? We want that because it's going to actually allow us to change the height of our actual framing or the sides of our lemonade stand themselves. So go into newels and balusters, which is going to be the actual height of this, okay? And I think 36 inches might be a little bit short. What do you think? So sometimes if we're going to set at a desk, we want to be more like a 42-inch height, okay? So I'm going to change that to 42, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right, now that's our wall for the front, and now we're going to draw 3 more of those to complete our box. So I'll go in here, I'll do the same thing, half wall, and I said 2 feet by 4 feet. So what we're going to do first is just draw them in a box and see how that line is, see how that X at the bottom right corner? See how it's highlighted there? That means I've actually gone to the outside of the other wall. So that's where I want to go, and then I'm going to bring it up. And then the next thing I'm going to do is go back here. I want to select this wall. Okay, same thing. I want to have this at 24 inches. And then I'm going to go into newels and balusters. I'm going to just make the same height at 42. I'm going to hit OK. Same thing with this wall. 24. 42. And this last wall here, I want it at 42 for the height. Okay. Bam. There's our actual box itself. Okay. And if you guys want to take a quick visual of this, we just go right in here. We can go to cameras and we go to framing overview. And I got to build my framing.
None of this stuff you'll really have to know. Okay, so there's our actual framing box, all right? This is going to give us the idea of what we need as material to build the actual frame, okay? And I think we'll be okay at 2 feet. I think 42 inches is good, but we can kind of play around with that, and that's kind of our model, all right? So that's our standard box, okay? And then I'm going to have some sort of covering on this, right? So you can see our framing here. It's going to actually model. We can scroll in on this nice and close. And do you know what these little rectangles and X's are?
Are they the planks?
So this is the framing, and this shows you how the framing is going to go together. So this is a channel here, right? So this provides backing, and this is all of our the whole construction put together. And again, like I was saying before, this actually helps you understand and conceptualize how this all goes together, right? So it's showing me literally how my framing is going to be connected on the wall. And I'm drawing it very standard framing like I would build a house, okay? For a wall for a house, it's the same thing. So that's kind of the idea with the actual box itself. Is step one is you just build that. Now, we want to have a nice stand on top of a sign, right? And I'm thinking we're going to have a little roof as well. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build the roof. Okay, so as we're getting kind of this entire box assembled, we're now working on adding the posts that would connect the roof that would cover this entire structure. And after a little deliberating, Willow and I have decided that this box itself, the actual wall structure, is just a smidge too high. We've determined that the desk size that she's comfortable sitting at as we speak is 30 inches high currently, which would be a good height for her or her friends or her brother to use with stools or chairs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the height of all these walls by selecting. So I'll hold down Control and click on each one of these and then go to Open. And then I'm going to go back into Newells and baluster, so that's the height of our wall, and we're going to go to 30 inches on all of these. And if you can see in this right here, we've actually added some siding to the exterior because we've decided we want to do some sort of wood cladding on the outside of this to make it pretty cool. So although that's not going to be the color, it's going to be some sort of cedar probably, or maybe even pine beetle. I'm thinking of a lap siding, something simple I can show her. We're going to assemble that, but that's going to be on the exterior. We'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so now we scroll back in here and you can see where our 2x4s come together at our channel for connection. This is actually a 2x2 post here, and if I hit tab, I can select on this. I'll open this up. Let's bring this over so you guys can see it. So we have our total top height. This is a stock 2x2 by 8 foot piece, okay? And what I'm actually going to do is we've determined our roof height to be 40 inches from the top of where the table will be at the top of this wall. So if we wanted it 40 inches from the top of this framing, the entire stick, which is going to actually be attached to this framing, as you can see here, it needs to be 70 inches. So I'm going to unclick this and I'm going to go back and type 70 inches because 30 plus 40 is 70. Then I'm going to hit lock total height. So we're still at the bottom on 0 at the ground here, and hit OK. And that's going to give us our post structure for our roof. Now, so there's our actual structure. Now we have a material list. Now the only other thing we need to do is figure out how we're going to run these stringers or these cords, so to speak, to connect back to front so then we can roll our roof out, right? And in theory, we might have a cross brace here in the middle. As we get into the build itself, we might change that, but we're going to get a little bit of extra material just to make sure that if we add something or change something during the build, which is always part of a design concept, when you're a designer, you want to make it as simple as possible and as complete as possible, but at the same time, you have to understand how things get put together. So if you are sitting here, as you are, not understanding how framing happens or how these components get put together, it's kind of going to be more difficult for you in your job as a designer to figure out, well, how am I going to put this together on a computer, not understanding how in real space these all get put together as components. So now we're going to put our material list together, and we can literally just sit here and count these pieces plus the plywood and the siding that we're going to use, and I'll have all of the materials that you're going to need in the description below. I'll also have a link to this completed plan so you guys can literally pull it up and use it yourself, including the material list. So without boring you guys too much more, that is basically how you want to use this program to design the beginning of your lemonade stand. And I said earlier that we're going to use siding. You guys can complete this simply with plywood to cover the outside. From here you can change anything you want in here, but that's how we're going to do it, and then we're going to have our roof material as well, okay? So we're literally going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There's 18 studs. Now these are at 30 inches. Do you know what dimensions in length that framing lumber comes in? Do you think it comes in 30-inch pieces, or do you think we have to buy some and cut it down? Okay, so this is the part that we're going to have fun with, all right? We're going to buy 8-foot stock lumber 2x4, okay? And this 2x4 is 96 inches or 8 feet. And if we cut that in half, what is that? What's half of 8? 4 feet, all right? So we're actually going to be able to order this much and then cut it in half, okay? So if I said we need 18 studs, but these are only going to be less than half, then what's 18 divided by 2?
Well, 9.
9 studs here, plus we need 1 and 2, 3, 4, okay? So again, we'll have all that in the material list in the description below. But there you go, guys. That's how you're going to actually draw this thing up, and that's how I create a lot of stuff. So no matter what it is, simple or entire house, got to have plans for something before you get going, because you got to have a concept of what you're going to go get. Otherwise, you're going over to a lumber store or Home Depot, wherever you go, and you're going to sit there and say, I have no idea what I need to buy, right? So now we have our idea. We know what it's going to look like in 2D dimension, and we're going to run over to the lumber store, and we're going to grab our materials, and we're going to start building it. Is that working?
Yep.
Okay. These are a little bit twisty. I'll make it work. All right, so it's build day. Here we go. So the first things we have to determine are based on what we've designed on our plans. And that has to do with our length of every cut we're going to make with our 2x4s. And the understanding behind 2x4 construction and what we're doing is the most important thing. That means we have to know what our height is going to be, our width is going to be, and our on-center layout is going to be for our studs. And all of that makes no sense to most of you right now, but we're going to go through that and explain. Starting with, if you guys remember from the design, we are building a 4-foot by 2-foot wide lemonade stand with a roof. Okay, and we'll break that all down in sections. So now we have to determine, well, we have our cut station set up, what we're cutting each one of these boards at, because we want to cut everything and then assemble it once everything is cut. So first things first, we have to understand what a 2x4 is. Okay, a 2x4 is a nominal dimension, which means it's actually an approximate or a common statement number. Okay, the actual measurement of a 2x4 is 3.5 by 1.5. Okay, it's 3.5 this way by 1.5 that way. Okay, so now that we understand that, we can start determining our different cuts, because the walls are going to be assembled sort of like Legos. It's going to be assembled the same way as the way we would frame a house wall in construction. So the first thing we need to know is we have to have our top plate and our bottom plate, which holds the studs together. Okay, those plates sit flat on the top this way and on the bottom this way. That means we have 1.5 inches at the bottom and 1.5 inches at the top. We have to remove
from our stud length. And if our entire height of our lemonade stand is going to be 30 inches, we actually have to remove 1.5 minus 1.5 to determine our stud length. 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3 inches. Okay, so if we're going to be 30 inches total, 30 minus 3 is 27. Okay? Each one of our studs will be cut at 27 inches. Great, now we know our stud length. We also need to know our plate length. And that's going to be a little bit tricky because if you cut it 4 feet by 2 feet, and if you think about these going together, we're not going to be 4 feet by 2 feet when we're finished, right? So now we have a 3.5 inch dimension. We have to determine which way the wall is going to go. Is it going to be outside to outside for our 4-foot wall or outside to outside for our 2-foot wall? I will show you the easiest way to do that, and that's going to be running 4 feet and then our inside dimension, okay? So we're going to actually cut all of our studs first, and then we'll have the rest of the material left over for our plates, and then I'll show you how to lay out a 16-inch on-center framing wall.
All right, so now to the cutting. I've got Willow laying out every single stud. We're going to mark all the studs before we cut them. So step 1 is measuring our 27-inch length and making sure that you're using the tape measure properly. If you guys don't know the little trick with hooking the tape measure and pulling on it correctly to get the exact dimension you need and not be off by a 1/16 of an inch, make sure you go back and check out that video on how to use a tape measure that I have here on the channel. Okay, so once I have her laying them out, she's going to mark all of those before we cut them. And what I'm having her do is, like you guys can do as well, is use the speed square to make all of your marks and have your guidelines for every single cut from that straight edge before you make all of your cuts. So much easier when you have a guideline. So if you don't have a speed square, you can use a straight edge of some sort, combo square, whatever you might have. Certainly speed squares are not that expensive, and you can go get them at any box store that you want. Okay. The other thing to notice is when I had her start laying these out, she could actually go ahead and do 3 studs per 8-foot 2x4, which was important because I let her lay out the first 2, and she discovered that she could actually get 3 studs per cut just by flipping the tape measure the other way on the board and not having to do any additional math, meaning 27 times 3. She could get to 2, but 3 was a little bit slower, which is okay. Willow's very smart at math, but when you're on a job site, you can see here, we got 3 out of them simply by her referencing the other side of the board and measuring back 27 inches. So you can get 3 cuts per board for the Okay, once you have all your studs marked, go ahead and start cutting them. Make sure you're cutting in a fashion that's not binding your blade. I always harp on safety, especially with saws, and it's so important that you're using gravity to allow the board to cut away from you, and you're not cutting down the middle. If you notice here, I'm cutting towards the end of the sawhorses. I'm using the groove to support the board as I cut, and I'm cutting down at an angle. I'm not cutting them completely flat across the board to prevent any sort of binding that could create kickback and potential injury of any kind. So keep that in mind. If you don't know saw safety, go ahead and review that before you start cutting. Now, I want you guys to understand too that you have to figure out how many studs you're going to be cutting, most of it ahead of when you start cutting. Otherwise, you're going to randomly start cutting through stock that you may not need, or you may blow through extra stock that you need for something else. Simple way to figure out how many studs you need per wall or per build here. So we're determining a 16-inch on center assembly. That means, as I'm showing here, the 16 inches on center is measured from the middle of one stud to the middle of the next stud. And I apologize that the audio wasn't working on this section of film, but that's why I'm doing the overlay now. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So in order to do that, we know that those studs, those 2x4s, are 1.5 inches at the small dimension, okay? 1.5 inches is the actual depth of that board. And so in order to find our 16-inch layout, we need to divide 48 inches for our long wall, divided by 16 inches on center. That shows you we need 3 studs, as I'm showing here on the calculator. And we also we're going to have corner framing to attach, since I referenced earlier that we're going to be flipping the actual layout, basically reverse of what the design was on the computer earlier. So we're actually going to need 5 studs per long wall, and we're going to need 3 studs per short wall. So that's how we determined how many studs we needed to cut, and we came up with a total of 5 plus 5 and 3 plus 3. That's 16.
Okay, so now that we've cut all of our studs, at least we think we have, we're going to do our plate layout. And again, the plates are the top and bottom pieces of the wall, and they sit horizontally this way. So we have a 3.5 inch wide wall, okay? Conventional 2x4 construction. Again, it's going to be as simple can be. Okay, the trick now is determining the length of each of our plates, because we're going to have a top and bottom for each wall. We have 4 walls. 4 times 4, or 2 times 4 is 8. We have 8 plates we have to cut. Now, we said we're 4 feet by 2 feet, but that doesn't mean we can cut 4 feet by 2 foot plates, because these are going to go together like so, okay? So that being said, we're going to take our long wall and make out a 4-foot plate, which means our short wall is not going to be 24 inches. It's going to be 24 inches minus 3.5 and minus 3.5, because each plate is butting up to another wall, okay? 24 minus 7, 17, because that's 24 minus 3.5 minus 3.5 is 17 inches. That's our short wall plate, okay? So we're going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4 at 4 feet, and then we're going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4 at 17 inches, okay? Okay, so next step we're going to do is learn how to do a 16-inch on center layout, so you guys can get a really easy grasp of how these walls are constructed, okay? So, first step is understanding what 16-inch on center means. We explained earlier in the video that it means the center of this board to the center of this board. So if these are 1.5 inches in actual depth for each board, half of that is 3/4, okay? So we're going to measure back 3/4 of an inch from the 16-inch mark. If I find that 16 is on center, I need to find the edge of my board so I can mark it and know where I can nail the next stud. So I go, and this is very easy on most tape measures now, because anything that's in red here in a square is going to designate a 16-inch mark. So 16, 32, 48, so on, okay? So I pull, just like I would with any other measurement, I pull tight, and I find my 16, and again, I have both my top and bottom plate together, and I'll show you why in a second. Hold those tight, and I mark 16, and I come back 3/4 of an inch. So 15.25, I mark it off. Then I go to the next one, 32, 31.25, mark it off. All the way out here, I'm going to have my edges, okay? So my edge studs, if I push these nice and tight together, because I'm going to mark everything, XX, okay? Now I'm going to come back, I'm going to mark, making sure that I'm flush on the edge, I'm going to mark both studs. Same thing I would do with any other mark. Draw down, okay? The stud goes on that side because it's 3/4 of the way this way. I went back 3/4 of an inch. Come back to the next one. This is the edge of my stud, mark it, stud goes here. X marks the spot. So that's the edge of my stud. It's going to be nailed here. And then I'm going to have 2 edge as well. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 per 8-foot wall, but I also have corners, so I'm going to have 2 more on this one. Okay, so there's my stud layout. I have my X's marking where the studs go. These go on the edges. These go just to the right of the line. That's the X's of the side that it goes on, all the way out. Now I'm going to lay out my top and bottom plate. We're going to nail them together, and I'm going to show you how these 2 walls between the 2-foot and the 4-foot wall go together by building our corner framing. Okay, next step, before I can actually frame this wall up, is I got to actually nail up my corner framing to attach the 2 walls together, because it's got to be in one piece so I can lay it out inside the wall. So basically what's going to happen is, instead of a 3-piece, I'm going to do a simple 2-piece, almost a California type scenario. And I'm going to nail these 2 boards together like this, so when this last stud goes in, I now have a nailing surface for my next short wall, okay? Easiest way to do that is just to set it on the ground. Make sure that the board is flush on the ends and at the face. And then I take this other scrap block and I put it under here so when I lean on this board to nail it, it doesn't go flopping off. All right, check one more time that I'm as flush as can be. So I have a nice flat nailing surface. And I go ahead and nail it off. Nail this off. 2 nails on each side. Again, I'm finding my X, making sure these are flush. All right, there's our first 4-foot wall. So we're going to continue that process for the 3 other walls. Walls are framed up. The next step is going to be obviously attaching the whole assembly together. Now you can come over here and see this is our corner framing. So that's why I did those 2 studs together. Oops, sorry. Because that's going to go right up against this and get nailed in place. And now I have a nice big nailing surface to run 2 nails per stud all the way down, and it's a nice solid attachment. So I'm going to attach my first 4-foot wall to my short walls, and then I'm going to come and bring the other last wall in, and we'll finish assembling that and nail it all up. And then once that's done, we can put our top and bottom pieces on together, and we'll have that assembly put together. Then we can attach the wheels before we put the roof on, and then we'll frame the roof, and I'll show you how to actually do the roof, including how to cut your common rafters, because we're going to do an 8-12 pitch as Willow picked, and that'll be really exciting. And then we can finish this whole thing off with some really cool cedar siding. Okay, so before I nail up this last wall, I want to check square on one side, and I want to make sure this corner is square. I want to now square this side up because this is not attached yet. So I'm going to take my speed square, I'm going to shove it right in here. I'm going to find where square is because it'll be tight to both edges. And if I'm flush and I'm square, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that off, and I actually make a pencil mark right where I'm square. So I have a guide, so when I come back to nail it, I can see where that edge is and manipulate it where I need to nail it off. All right, so next step is we have to figure out our marks for our 4 posts that are going to come up to attach the roof. And so what we've done is I've had Willow get up underneath the box itself, and then we dry fit our top on, and while I held it down, she went underneath and she scribed each corner of where our framing member comes up to meet our post that can attach there. And from there we now have our 4 marks where we can actually cut the holes out of those 4 sides and then attach the top, and then we're going to slide our post down and nail everything, or actually screw everything in to the framing members into the box so those posts are nice and solid, just like the design showed at the beginning. Okay, so now you can see where Willow has scribed her corners. All right, and this is literally just a mirror image of itself flipped over. So what we're going to do now is we're going to mark out, like I've done here, I'm going to trace out my post. You can either take a scrap piece if you've already cut your post to length, and you can set it on those 2 lines, or this is a great way to use your speed square. And I can come right in here and I will mark it 1.5 here, 1.5 there, and then I can actually draw my lines there, and from there. And that's where I'm going to cut. Moment of truth. Perfect fit. Right down in there. So that gets attached. We can actually come now and screw from the outside of this into the framing member. And we're going to have our 4 posts go down on those holes. And then we can frame up our roof. Okay. So we've dry fit everything. All 4 of our posts are in. I haven't actually cut these to size yet. But we're dry fitting to make sure everything stays square so we can screw down our top. All right, so the next step is I'm actually going to use composite decking screws. These are 1.25" composite decking screws, and we're going to screw it down to our frame. And then once this part is screwed down, we're going to flip it over and we're going to screw down the bottom. And that way we can tip it upside down to put the wheels on. So, impact driver, composite screws, and I'm just going to work my way around this edge until everything's fastened down. Okay, next step is gonna put the wheels on. So we have, as you can see here, 4 caster wheels with a locking mechanism. So once the lemonade stand is wheeled into place, you can lock down the wheel so it doesn't roll away on you as you're trying to make or sell lemonade. So this step is pretty obvious. We're gonna flip it over so it's upside down for the wheels. So whatever side your finished side is for your stand, we go opposite of that. And we're just gonna set the 4 wheels right here at the corners, so edge to edge on the lemonade stand. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to set them in there nice and tight. I'm going to kind of just feel with my fingers that I'm pretty much flushed up both ends here and here. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my 4 holes. And then we'll go around, do all 4 of the wheels just like that. And then I'm going to drill pilot holes for each one of these. And then I'm going to use my impact driver and take my 1.25" deck screw, just like we did with the top. We're going to go ahead and screw it on down. Once we do that, we'll flip it over, and then we can do our finished sides with our cedar siding that we've picked. So let's go ahead and set those screws in now. So as Willow is marking the holes here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the first wheel, and I'm going to drill my pilot holes, and then I'm going to set that wheel back in place and set the screws. Okay, so the next step is we're going to add our cider seating to the front and sides. So what I'm going to actually use on this, and Willow's going to help of course, is a brad nail. We're going to use 2-inch nails to nail these in place to each one of the framing members on the front and the sides of the stand. One thing to think about if you're doing it this way, when you're setting these boards in place, most likely you're not going to have full pieces from top to bottom. You're going to have a piece that will have to be ripped on a table saw or some sort of ripping tool that you can use. And I feel it's better to have that less than full piece towards the bottom of the stand. If you want it at the top, you can do that. You can also add trim to the top of this to kind of cap it off. We're not going to do that here, but we're going to start from the very top, and I'm going to go ahead and set the first board. We're going to use our speed square to make sure we're level on both ends. We're going to nail it in place and run all the way back down, and we'll see what we end up with our last piece. So okay, so next step in the build is going to be cutting your 4 posts to the length, that desired length that you want. We've decided on this one to go 70 inches from the bottom of the lemonade stand. So I'm going to go cut all of these at 70 inches, and then we'll start building the roof. But first I'm going to show you how to install these into the actual box that we've built for the stand itself. Okay, so we're going to set our post like I was explaining before. Then we're going to make pilot holes along this framing member. I'm going to hold it nice and tight while I do that. And then we're going to go ahead and set our 1¼ deck screws into the frame member itself, and that's nice and secure, okay? And that's all you have to do for all 4 of them, and they're set for the next step.
Okay, amor fate, as the shirt says. We had some more microphone issues, so I'm going to talk to you here about what we're doing. Next steps are running these stringers or bottom cords onto our posts, securing them all with, again, the 1¼ deck screws. Keep in mind, you want to drill pilot holes for all of this wood so none of it splits on you, and it also is easier to go ahead and set your screws at head depth as well. So what I do is I take the 2 ends and I set those 2 pieces first, getting anything that might be a little bit crooked. Sometimes these 2x2s, especially if they're reclaimed or recycled lumber, get a little crooked or cronky. So I go ahead and set those 2 ends first, and then I set the 2 long pieces next, setting them one at a time to make sure my measurements are correct. If I do have to manipulate one of the posts just a smidge to make sure everything is straight before we put on the roof. All right, so as you can see here, I'm using some clamps to set my board, even though I've got my awesome helper Willow, who is the designer behind all of this, clamping everything and helping kind of pull the post together straight, as I was talking about earlier, is really helpful. This way you can also make sure your pilot holes are nice and straight. It just frees up hands for you anytime you can do that. I always recommend it. It also helps Willow, as I was, of course, teaching her what to do during this build as the design, build, and concept come to life, and everything that she's gathering as she's learning too. I also recommend going ahead and set the first pilot hole on your stringer board on the ground before you have to reach up and push them together, because again, you're working with 2x2 material. So did that, then clamped everything together, and then finished drilling through into our posts, and everything became secure with the screws. Okay, once you get the 2 side stringers secure, go ahead and run that front one, again using the clamps, pilot hole on the ground to begin with, and then finish your drilling once you've clamped everything in place, making sure everything is flush, tight, and square. Then go ahead and move to the back stringer. And again, once that front stringer is in, you can go ahead and check your measurement on the back. And if anything has to be manipulated or plumbed up, you may have to cut a little more off that back stringer, which is why you want to do one of these at a time. And remember, you can always cut more. You can never make the board longer once you cut it. And as with every great custom build, comes changes in the middle or end of the project. In this case, Willa decided to veer away from her original 812 gable roof and went with a flat roof, and that was fine because I had some scrap blue stain pine tongue and groove siding. It was a V-groove that actually worked out well for the front and back overhang. And again, all materials will be left in the description below so you can see what we used in the change here. And if you decide to go this direction, it is definitely a great way to go. Still provided shade for her when she's selling her cold drinks, at the same time gave her kind of a cool look and a little bit of flair as well.
Okay, final roof inspection is in. We're done. So next step is going to sand down all the exterior, the cladding, the top, the sides, the underside of the roof, everything that's got a little bit of a rough edge. Again, we're using a lot of recycled and reclaimed material. Some of this is a little rough on a couple sides, as you guys can see. So Willow's going to go ahead and hit all those edges with some just 220 grit is all you need. And once it's all sanded down, you can paint it if you want. I know Willow's going to leave it natural looking, and it's ready to go. You hang your sign, start making some bucks. All right, Willow, have fun.